please unmute yourself?
Okay, that should be okay.
Okay, yeah. So, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see such a large number of people coming on this Sunday again. We have three speakers this morning. I will not introduce any one of them because you know them already. They have been with us and taking sessions even earlier. We have Dr. Gajanan Rao, Professor P. Krishna, and Mr. Tankha. And the theme of our session today is why human beings don't change fundamentally, even after reading or listening to Krishna. So I'll request each speaker to maybe talk for about 20-25 minutes and leave about 15 minutes for participant to ask questions. We may begin with Dr. Gajanan Rao, followed by Professor Krishna, and then Mr. Tankha. So may I request Dr. Gajanan Rao, sir, to please go ahead and start your talk. Yes, sir. Welcome.
Morning, everybody. Your audience are increasing. There are, I think, Guratians I see. I see people from Tambram. And of course, Indore and Bombay and so on. Indore has become a familiar ground to play my cricket. But the subject today, although oft repeated and reminded by Krishnaji, is a very difficult subject to deal. In the sense, he repeatedly asked, why don't you change? And not just change, but fundamentally, basically, radically. All these are exact adverbs given. Well, a question was asked to Krishnaji long ago when he was alive, but much before initial talks I had heard. Somebody in the group meeting in the discussion meeting asked him, "So you take so much about anger and violence. Have you not ever been angry?" Krishnaji, after a brief halt, brief silence, said, "Yes, sir, I have been angry once. And looking at the consequences, I have never been angry again." This is a man to whom we were listening. That is a seer. He sees but once. He doesn't need a second reminder. And we are still in the state of being reminded every now and then, "Oh, don't get so angry. Don't get too touchy. It's okay. Things will be all right." And somebody has to be reminding either your wife or friend or somebody else. But I would say, after all the listening, well, if Krishnaji said he would pounce on me, I couldn't accept, in all humility, maybe a little patch of arrogance here and there, that I have somewhat changed. In a sense, not somewhat changed. There are patches I feel are fresh. Modified maybe, but when he asked the question and says, "Sir, at least intellectually listen." One wondered, what was that? Sometimes you say there's a lot of homework to do. I wondered what? Then how can a change be instant if there's a lot of homework? Then he said, "Sir, you know this, the drum instruments, and when you beat, it's so tuned, it emits such a beautiful sound. Or your instruments, in your string instruments, are tuned properly, emits beautiful music. Can you tune yourself like that? To be fresh and responsive any time of the day or night." For he always said nights are also times when things would go on. If you observed all day long, very, very intensively, attentively to everything that happened, your conversation with people, your transaction the whole day without missing anything, and your nights or as when you go to sleep, mind is fresh, to go on even as you sleep. There are things that happen to sort of put you right if there is anything wrong. So there are opportunities and scope, I think, quite a lot of a person changing even basically. If there is no scope at all, what's the idea of talking about it already often on again? Well, he is always pointing to the world and society, which is us, which is such decadence, such demoralizing things, such degeneration, violence, and killing everywhere. He always said that they are killing. Only our species seem to kill each other. Mass killing. It doesn't happen with other animals. In competition, they don't kill each other. Here in competition, oh, that fellow may get elected, he's getting more popular. He said may rule. And those days, the war, when Hitler was presiding over a lot of things, he had to raise his brow. Krishnaji himself say, heads will roll. That is the efficacy we have, the human beings, to mass destroy our own species. So what is the world coming to with all this greed, envy, jealousy, hate, anger? What is the world coming to? Today we are friends, tomorrow we are dead enemies. Don't talk again for another 30 years. We caught like that. There is no patience for us. There is no, what shall we say, the kind of your material is such that it gets so rotten at times, the brain matter, that even to settle to a normal state, it takes a long time. Haven't you seen this? In our own selves, something of a rude, crude nature had happened to you. It carried on and on for a very long time. So that is the kind of brain cells which are ready to receive and not ready to let go. And there is registration going all the time, whether we want it or not. That's how we'll interpret it. Then Krishnaji occasionally said, it's possible, he would say, not to register things that are not necessary to load your brain with. I had not known that, but occasionally I have known this, but because tomorrow's response to anybody or a situation will depend on how I allow the registration to be. If it's like a bomb going in, damaging the whole lot of brain cells, so somebody's cold, somebody's reaction, definitely it makes a great dent. Not easy to be rid of it. So I'm making very simple. I'm a man who can't complicate things. There are lots of things to go into and there's only 10 minutes more. So I'm saying, I experimentally seen this, not that what any one of you can do this also. You sit in your room, I am a doctor, and somebody comes and throws a lot of tablets and say, doctor, what have you done? I have bought all this. I have been with you for so long. I'm not a little better. You must say it very angrily. You won't even sit down. He's shouting through his head, right standing. You know, if you have patience, if you have some kindness in you. I won't use the word, could even use the word at times, affection for your own patient, another being, and something has happened to him. He is complaining. He may be even shouting at me. It may be rational, irrational. So I would like to offer him a seat, say, sit down. What's happened? I don't know. What did you take? What did he give? So I am also, there is little humility in that listening. Humility is care also. Care is also kindness. Kindness is also affection. So one has at least imbibed that in oneself after all the years of listening to Krishnaji, and probably one was that a little bit already, I don't know. But the way he steadily washed you off, washed you down in all his talks and your transaction with him, something tremendous he had done. The response may be not as tremendous, but one cannot say there is no response at all. One would really accept one has not changed completely. Yes, I would not. But then a miracle happens in the room when the man had shouted at the top of his voice, very angry. He says, don't come, sit down. What has happened? I want to know. I'm so sorry if you are not well. I should have attended to that. This is all not just to cajole you. You really feel that. So he had said also, I mean, you connect now, not that he said and remembered it. Listening is a miracle. Listening does a miracle. But in that listening, as I said, there is care, there is a certain respect for the other, a regard for the other. It all also means a certain affection in your soil of the brain and heart. So he is quietened enormously. He's willing to listen to you. Either you realize your mistake, you haven't diagnosed it well, or you must tell him, no, it's going to take time, don't be in such a hurry. So this, I'm not saying this means small changes in us that have come about. Thanks to Krishnamurti, I would say, and you are lending a very sharp, patient ear to whatever he said. Must have happened in us, I don't know. And the response is that we are in such awful people with no thought for the other. After all, what is the world and what is society? Society is very harmonious. Society is a place that you would enjoy living with people, provided each one thinks of the other. You have left a space for the other. It's not that you have said something harsh and give back with same force or even a worse force. So society is coming to that now. Instead of, after all the learning lessons, after all the divisions we have, it is dangerous to be angry, isn't it? Sorry. These are the days we should know that it is dangerous to be angry. Imagine an irate politician angry with another country. It may not happen, fortunately, it doesn't happen, maybe it is. The press of a button will evict the atom bomb from its source, go and hit another country. Devastating effects. So I think all this, pondering over these things, the disaster that was happening, the anger that's having havoc, the enmity that developed, and the division that are making these conflicts worse. Krishnaji has very beautifully said, why countries? Why nationalities? And he had always said, nationalism is poison. And can we imagine, most of the tax money is going to armaments to kill. We call it defense equipment, but we are getting ready to kill. And the poor soldier, the one from the day he gets in and gets the Paramavir Chakra or whatever, sometimes his wife may get it for him. So all this preparation, the soldier doesn't know he is going to kill many, many people across the border. So if you're talking of change, and a change in the whole world to make it a very happy place to live in, naturally it is that every one of us have to change. They know that. Because the change can be superficial, can simply got erased, and the whole poor quality must come in, all the disorders. Therefore, Krishnaji was requesting us, appealing to us, can the change be fundamental? Can the change be radical? And sometimes you wonder, with all our million years of conditioning, and that is driving force for us, we don't on our own do anything. There is something. Before you act, there is a reaction. And that conditioning is looking after it. Before I say somebody calls somebody a fool, is calling me 100 names. They're already there to be like bullets to be let off. It looks as though enmity is easier in today's world than friendliness. We have made the world that way. So we can't just blame the conditioning and be quiet. Looks as though to be able to change completely, we have to look at the conditioning that is gripping us totally. So how does one attend to that? This may be a question. How does one be rid of the reaction-producing machinery, which is old, which is thought, is the memory of memory, responsive memory, knowledge and all that. So there's vast amount of stored knowledge, which is useful in one area and terribly a nuisance in so many other areas where psychological transactions are going on. They need not be there also. That has to be attended for ourselves to be change, for ourselves to, tune ourselves to be ready to change. We have to look at that, I thought. Because when you let thinking be, it's only adding the condition, conforming condition. So self-knowing, which is an essential thing to happen in changing ourselves, can happen in a kind of meditative state of the mind, where I am not prominent, where the self isn't to operate, not operating. Can there be such self-knowing? Krishnaji has said, don't talk of meditation unless you have set the house in order. We won't change, of course, because all our qualities will go. We are ever ready to, ride a trodden, go a trodden path rather than an unknown path, because we got used to so many things. Conditioning is secret, and the conditioning is there. So anything off the usual ground is fear for us. Krishnaji may be saying, as told us of incidences where caught in a forest, wild animal in front. He had managed them without any reaction. The animals can sense your anger and reaction. Such fearless states we have seen him through. We have seen him in. And when he describes you, really, you get a heart throb. So, for any change to occur, for fear not to be, for violence not to be, for all the good qualities to enter, one has to be ready to go on a trip of meditation, to go on a trip of knowing oneself. And that happens when you're in a state so calm. Or it can be happening all the time. It's not that you set aside a time, as I said. It can happen all the time. One is alert and one is tuned to a certain amount of awareness. Like the man comes to the room and shouts, if you are aware what is happening to him and to you, there's a balance. You're in perfect balance to listen. Like that, awareness is a key word. Wandering over is a key word. Knowing ourselves intimately is a key word. And for all this to happen, our pondering over all the disorders disturbing our life is also essential. So almost 20 minutes now, I will stop. So I am saying, why is not a change happening? Well, it might happen, it might not happen. I might not change immediately. There may be occasions where I open myself to such a possibility in all my awareness. After all, we are human beings. Our consciousness is a sheet of water. We are sharing it. And that consciousness is getting terribly disturbed. It's a consciousness full of its content which is not maybe so favorable for change. So, in this meditative state in us, which may allow self-knowing, to look at ourselves and change. So all this looks as though one has to only look at oneself with all the attention, with all the awareness. Change is waiting to happen. This we cannot deny. There are things you just let happen. But if things don't happen, even that atom bomb hitting you on the head, as somebody's word, is not allowed to come into you like that. So I have a feeling we shall not say it cannot happen. It's terrible after having listened to Krishna so long. One can look at it very sharply, very at leisure, and I have a feeling it can happen. Why is it not happening are the factors we are going to, which I have gone into partly. Our own fear, our own conditioning, which can also be got rid of by a quality of a brain which is sharp, has a meditative response, not a firebank. So I will not go along. It is 25 minutes already too busy, because this is a part where we can't clear the ground straight. Maybe the two speakers who are experts in this have been in schools teaching, have met Krishnaji, been with them. I'm sure they will tell us much more. I will stop here and maybe there's a chance I will talk again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think very well placed. May I request Professor Krishna now to begin your talk, sir?
Yes, first, I think that's an observed fact that though millions of people have been studying Krishnamurti and have also attended his talks and interacted with him, including myself, that radical change which he talked about has not really happened. So that tells us that change doesn't happen just because you listen to a talk or read a book or come close to a realized person. That's an observed fact. And one needs to accept that fact. So how does change come about and why is it not happening? Now, Krishnaji said that what he is saying or what is written in his book is not the truth, but it points to the truth. And we must investigate it in our own life, in our relationships. Question it. What does he mean? And is it true? Then not answer it from our own conditioning, but stay with that question and observe our consciousness operating in the mirror of relationship. And from there, you can pick up a truth. That's the work of self-knowledge, which one has to do. And all change is a byproduct of such understanding, not just the intellectual understanding of his words and the discussion of it, but at the level of perception. One has to be very clear of the difference between perception and ideation. Perception includes all the senses. It's like when you perceive the danger of fire, you don't need arguments. You don't need conviction. You perceive it directly. So perception has a much deeper quality than ideation. It's very easy to know the truth. You can read the Buddha, you can read Krishnamurti, and they have described it. But that doesn't mean that you have perceived that truth. And without you yourself perceiving it, it does not transform consciousness, does not really bring about a change. So that's the difficulty. And what comes in the way of perceiving the truth, as Dr. Rao pointed out, is our own conditioning. But the barriers to truth lie at deeper and deeper levels of our consciousness. How far you will be able to dig and eliminate those is the process of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is a process. The perception of truth is not a process which takes time. Either you have perceived or you have not perceived. But the truth lies at different levels of the consciousness, and some are easier to access and get rid of, and others you may never get there. So when you talk about radical transformation, you're talking about total freedom, or what is called liberation or enlightenment. We don't know what that is. But that's not the aim. I mean, Krishnaji himself has said that liberation is not an achievement. So that's one of the barriers in our conditioning, that our experience is that we plan, we have an aim, we get the tools, we go to experts and take advice, we practice, and we achieve the goal. We practice, we did our education that way, you build your house that way, you make your garden that way, you learn a language that way, and so on. So our experience is of this method. And the mind applies the similar approach to the field of the psyche. That if I am angry, if I am jealous, and so on, I should posit as ideal of non-anger, of love, and so on, and go to experts, learn some techniques, and reach there. And Krishnaji is saying that approach is itself flawed. because it's being done with an objective not to learn about oneself, but to achieve something. And that itself is the quality of the ego. And therefore it maintains the ego or the self, which is the source of all the problem. Now, these truths that he is pointing to are eternal truths. They have also been pointed out by the Buddha and by various other sages and so on. So they are right now around. They are truths about the way our consciousness functions. And I have the organs of perception. So why am I not able to perceive those truths right now? That's the question. What is the barrier? Is it society? Is it my education? Is it my neighbor? It's just myself. My own conditioning is the barrier. And therefore, I need to examine this conditioning. There may be things which are conducive, which are healthy in my conditioning, and there may be others which are blocking the truth. So that's the work of self-knowledge. It is a process of eliminating the barriers within oneself. You can't create truth, you can't invite truth, but you can eliminate the barriers within yourself to the truth. So let me enumerate some of those barriers. One is that we look upon all effort as towards an achievement. Now, when you make effort towards an achievement, it becomes a desire process. And the desire process is the essence of the ego. It will produce frustration, or it will produce pride, and all those things. So it won't free you from the ego process. You cannot come to freedom from the ego through an ego process. So Krishnaji says, freedom is at the beginning. Learning does not even begin unless you are free. And that's one of the difficulties, one of the barriers. The other big barrier I see is that one is really not interested in perceiving the truth. It becomes a sort of game that one plays intellectually, looking for the truth like you look for scientific truths and so on. Intellectual game. Or you do it as a means to an end, that I will achieve a state of peace and happiness. And so that imagination becomes your destination towards which you are progressing. And that whole approach is false because it sustains the ego. It's all the time, I'm wanting to achieve something, I'm wanting to get something for myself, I'm wanting to change myself or acquire a reputation and so on. And that is precisely what one needs to free, because that's the barrier. That ego is the biggest barrier. So it's an instinct coming to us from million years of the past that one seeks pleasure and avoids pain. In our case, it also means not just physical pleasure and physical pain, but psychological pleasure and psychological pain. And that is essentially the ego process, that you are seeking some reward, some pleasure, some enjoyment out of it, and you are wanting to avoid hurts or psychological pain, frustration, and so on. So is one really seeking the truth? You have to ask yourself that question quite deeply, because it's very easy to say, I am pursuing truth. And it may not be true. It may be an illusion. You may really be looking for a more comfortable state for yourself, psychological state for yourself. So this thing is very subtle. One has been brought up all the time being praised for achievements. Whenever you do something very cleverly or well, that is being called intelligence. And Krishnaji says cleverness, ability is not intelligence. There is no intelligence without compassion. And Dr. Maheshwari sent a passage today, if you have read it, which says intelligence is a sensitive awareness of what is. That means in the present. The critical word there is sensitive. We all have awareness, but sensitive awareness, you may have become insensitive, in which case you don't have sensitive awareness, and you cannot come upon sensitivity through lectures, through reading. It comes through contact. That's why in a Krishnamurti school, he wanted children to be brought up without reward, without punishment, without fear, in the beauty of nature, with respect for all life, and in an atmosphere in which there is non-violence, there is affection, and so on, because that is all what creates the sensitivity in the mind. Now, when you don't have sensitivity, you will pass by things without noticing them. When you are very ambitious, you are looking only in a particular direction, and that makes you insensitive to other directions. So it's all connected. It's freedom from ambition, freedom from desire. How you approach, what is the motive with which you are doing things, that is what one has to watch. Because everything can be done because you love to do it, because you are interested in it, you have a passion for it. And the same thing can be done as a means to an end, to get a reward, to get a name and fame, and so on, which means it becomes an ego process. Even a game can be played egoistically, or it can be played non-egoistically. If it's played non-egoistically, there is no frustration, there is no unhappiness, there is only the joy of playing the game. If it is played egoistically, there is frustration, there is the desire to play foul, all kinds of negative emotions follow from the ego approach. So the ego comes in the manner in which I am approaching something. It is not existing already in what is. And therefore the barrier is created by me. And if I can perceive the truth of this, I don't have to create it. I can do everything that I am doing, but not with ambition, not with desire, not with ideas of success or failure, but the opposite. Without ego means with love, with affection, with tenderness, with care, with responsibility, and so on. And that human beings, all of us, find very difficult, because there's a strong conditioning deep down, a feeling of being separate, of identified with the me and the mind, and wanting to work for the security and the profit of the me and the mind. and not for the good of the whole. So one has to watch all this, and in watching, if you discover the danger of that approach, it will drop away. It won't drop away because you think it is dangerous or because you agree that Krishnaji has pointed out, therefore it must be bad. So all the dangers which are there in traditional religion are there also with Krishnamurti's teaching, because those dangers are within me. I can make Krishnamurti into an authority, and authority will come into being. You can keep quoting him without doing what he's pointing to. You can enjoy, you can make intellectual enjoyment and of listening to his videos and having these dialogues and so on without learning anything. So it can be entertainment, depends on how I am approaching the teaching. So that is what one has to watch and become aware of. Because in a sense, that is a waste of time. If you fill your time with all activity where no learning is taking place. So Krishnaji insisted on coming upon a learning mind. And he said, the learning mind is the religious mind. The learning mind begins with the awareness that you don't really know. And of course, honesty and humility, which means you wish to know, but you know that you don't know. That's true humility. Then you inquire and you want to learn, not in order to reach some end. You may never get to that end. There is a very beautiful passage in the book called Meeting Life, where somebody asked him, what is transformation? And he's answered that, sir, it's not something mysterious. There is transformation when you approach, you see the dirt on the road. You see how politicians are behaving. And from that you learn. Then you go deeper and you see how these religious divisions arise and all that. So you free yourself of all that religious bigotry of your mind. Then you begin to discover that thought does not create love. And so you want to find out what is love and whether thought can have an end. Ultimately, it is being nobody, being nothing. So it goes all the way from learning, from watching on the road and so on. This is a whole process of self-knowledge. Now, when you go into it, of course, the simpler illusions will end first. Some simple truths will dawn on your mind first. But if you're satisfied with that, it stops, your inquiry stops. So never to be satisfied, not to live with conclusions and opinions, but to keep observing, learning, moving, which means you have to free yourself from this whole process of measuring and judging, which creates like and dislike, both of others and also of yourself. So all these are the barriers which are part of our conditioning. And if we see them as barriers and we are serious about the quest for truth, then these barriers can end. And after these barriers are ended, your work is done. Then you can't invite the truth, but it can enter. So I will end with one of his statements. He said, truth enters the mind like a burglar. You don't know when the burglar is going to come and how he is going to enter. But he will have to break down the defenses of your house in order to come in. And in the same way, truth can enter your mind when your defenses are down, which means your ego is not operating. So our concern is with learning not to approach life egoistically. It is not about what you have attained and what you have not attained. That's a process of measurement and progress. There's nothing of that in Krishnamurti. You may have anger, you may have jealousy, but how are you approaching your anger and jealousy? Are you approaching that with a learning mind, or you are again approaching that with an achieving, suppressing, manipulating mind? If you are approaching life with a learning mind, the learning will take place and the change will happen. You can't say, why I'm not reaching the state which Krishnamurti is reaching, because you also have to free your mind of comparison with others. And trying to become like Krishnamurti is one of the follies of this. The aim of this inquiry is not to become Krishnamurti. It's like saying, I'll read physics only if I can become Einstein. You will never become Einstein, but you can understand how the world works to whatever extent you have understood physics. In the same way, wherever you have reached in this inquiry into self-knowledge. So it's not true that no change takes place. I mean, if you free yourself of religious orthodoxy, if you free yourself of casteism and nationalism and so on, already there is change. But it is not total freedom, because you may still have habits, you may still have attachments and so on. But you can learn about those also. So his prescription, as I understood, was watch your consciousness. Every time there is disorder in consciousness, you have to learn from where it arises. And you will find that it always arises from some illusion. And therefore it can be ended by perceiving what is true and what is false. Because the false doesn't really have an existence in nature. It is just created by the human mind. Thank you. I'll end it here and
Thank you, sir.
pass it on to Harsh.
Thank you. You know, what you said is very perceptive, and you've covered a lot of ground about what it is that hinders us.
That's right.
And it prevents us from perceiving the truth. And having that quality that we see in Krishnaji of being, and it's difficult to describe it, so I won't even try just now to describe it.
Thank you.
So I will try and add something to what people have said, what Dr. Gajanan Rao has said. I may repeat some of the things because they are essential to one. So I would like by telling a story, start by telling a story. It's a Zen Buddhist story, and it goes like this. If you see the Buddha by the side of the road, what should you do? And the answer, if you know it, is kill him. And what does it mean? It means that we have an image of what this transformation is like, what an enlightened person is like. Ever since children, we have heard about the Buddha, we've heard about enlightenment, nirvana, moksha, transformation, all these things. We are full of images and ideas of what also a transformed person is like. That is compassionate, no conflict, free of desires, doesn't anger, celibate. Sometimes people feel no sex because no desires, not committed to pleasure and all of that. So we have this idea, whether we like it or not, we may not even know it. It may just be there. So I'll tell another little story of my first time I went to have lunch with Krishnaji by himself. I wanted to talk about the school. I was in charge of the school, so there were some problems. I wanted to talk only with him about. So he said, come, this was Chalet Tannig in Switzerland. And when I went there, I he had a fly swatter in his hand and he was chasing this fly. So he said, wait. And he went bam, and he killed this fly, right? And he said, got it. It came as a huge shock to me because I didn't even realize, I hadn't thought about it, but I had the image in my mind that Krishnaji would not kill anything. But then not only did he kill this fly, but he did it with great satisfaction. And he said, got it. And it blew away, and not just that image, but the whole idea that I have images of what an enlightened person is. So I would now, rather in a lighthearted way, say, how can I even say that I haven't changed? In fact, I would say, because if I'm saying that because I have some idea of what enlightenment person should be like, and I don't match up with my idea of what an enlightened person is, therefore I haven't changed. And I think none of us is free of ideas of enlightenment or of transformation or whatever we want to call it that we have. So that is the first thing. And that also is quite interesting that many of us will just accept that no one has changed. How do we know that no one has changed? So what it points to really is, and throughout this, I will quote Krishnaji, and at the end, like a good academic, I will tell you what my sources were. So our perception of life is shaped by the concepts already established in our mind. So that's the kind of thing we must recognize immediately, that all the concepts we might have about the process, about whether it takes effort, they're not the product of our own perception of what actually is, that they are mainly, largely secondhand, that they are already established in our mind. And so they're not new. So that is one area that we need really to become aware of, right? So then the next thing I would like to say that people have changed. And I think quite a few people who are listening to this would say, I think even Dr. Rao and Professor Krishna was saying that some change has taken place. And I think it's actually quite dramatic changes that have taken place. I know Dr. Harshad Parekh is there in the audience right now, and he has spoken about how he had an insight that, in a sense, changed his life. And from that point onwards, his life was different. And he became interested in the teachings. He joined Rishi Valley School, etc. But his perception of life and what is important in life changed. I would say that I'm sure that Dr. Rao would say the same, and Dr. Krishna and myself, that our lives would have been very different if we hadn't glimpsed something, hadn't had some kind of insight into the teachings. I think all three of us are essentially rationalists. We are doctors or physicists or mathematicians and so on. So the fact that we are talking now about something that is beyond thought and reason is quite a dramatic shift in our perception from what we had. So, and it's been, let me put it, I know it sounds dramatic, but I'm purposely making it a bit dramatic. It's been life-changing. It has affected the course that people take in their lives when they begin to perceive when they have an insight into the teachings. So I think Scott Forbes was talking recently. He also said the same thing. People have changed. Yeah. But I think it is important, even at this stage, And here is another one of these things that in our thinking that might stand in the way of our understanding about transformation. That Krishnaji was not concerned about individual transformation. Like a lot of the spiritual traditions, maybe Buddha himself may not have been. I don't know what he said. Only what is reported through layers and layers of, it's not even second hand, third hand, fourth hand. It's by the time, or Ramana Maharshi or anybody you care to name, it's difficult to say what they were actually saying. But the way things are practiced and observed in the present day is often a focus on individual transformation. But Krishnaji is very clear about this. He has says, when asked what is his aim, what is it, he says very clearly that his aim is to transform the consciousness of humanity, right? And he explains this further. He's talking about the complete freedom from the content of consciousness, which is common to all humanity. I'm quoting now. So he is not an individual. So he is very clear that one of the errors we make in even approaching all this is that we consider ourselves individuals and we are looking at change on the level of the individual, when basically it's freedom from the content of consciousness, which is humanity's consciousness, of which I'm part. And as a doctor, Dr. Rao would say, to try and understand how my heart is beating, right? I have to recognize that all human hearts beat that way. It's just an example of so the problems I have in the heart are the problems of the heart, not of my problems as such. So to understand the content of consciousness, we have to recognize with the heart, maybe there are individual differences, but if you look at it carefully, you'll see that even what we think of as our individual consciousness is all the time being affected by, there is what I think this ebb and flow of this constant movement is changing and is completely in touch with the consciousness of humanity. So it's not even like the human bodies are different but similar, all human beings. There is just one movement, which is the movement of the content of consciousness, of which I am part. So any attempt to understand all this as an individual, it doesn't work out. And anyway, as was pointed out earlier, the individual transformation is essentially an egotistic thing and is very small, very limited. So our concern, if we understand the reality of it, is with the consciousness. What that means, we have to discover, right? So I think if you have been familiar with the teachings, I think most of the people here are, the central factor, and which I think has been mentioned, is freedom. Freedom from the known, freedom from the past, freedom from the self, freedom from the content of consciousness, no matter how you want to put it. It's that freedom. And it's not that we are saying we wipe all that out, or we wipe out memory, because it'd be nothing if we wiped out memory. But somehow we are not caught up. Whatever that means, we have to discover, what does it mean? I think Krishnaji says, to be in the world, to function in the world, to have all the involvement that we have with people and the work we do and so on, and yet not be caught up or attached to all of that. So that is the demand, right? And as Krishnaji says, this freedom is without motive, it's without direction. And this is the important thing, which I think was also mentioned. This freedom is not at the end of the evolution of man, but lies in the very first step. Now, this is a point that Krishnaji has made often. Often he says, the first step is the last step. So in a way, it's not a process by which bit by bit, through effort, through all of that, we arrive at the desired end. That it's not like that. I think Professor Krishna said that very well. That it is, but it's something that you start with. And this is enigmatic and difficult to actually see for oneself. And the reason for it, as he explains, is this. As has been clearly pointed out, the central aspect of all of this is self-knowledge, right? And that this self-knowledge is what we are engaged in. But the problem here is, how do we observe ourselves? How do we observe the self? If we do it through thought, we know that thought will distort, or it will be partial. All kinds of imaginary things will come in. So we cannot see the truth, which is after all the central thing here, through thought, because of its limitations. This is not to say thought is evil or bad, just that's not the instrument. So we have already to have a sense of what is beyond thought, whatever you want to call it. I try to avoid calling it names. But sometimes we talk of choiceless awareness, sometimes we talk of intelligence, sometimes we talk about the silent mind or the quiet mind, or but we need, and that is very clear. So we have to start with that. And I think, at least I hope, that many of the people, most of the people who are listening to this have some sense of this, have had actually an insight on what it is to have a different kind of mind. And not to say that no change has taken place. This is actually the primary and the central change. That is my way, my understanding of all of this. But it's only the first step. It's only the beginning. It's not the end. This is the first step. And we talk about it. When we say, I remember Dr. Rao saying that the teachings are subtle. And he talked quite a lot. I remember his talk in which he talked about the teachings being subtle. Other people talk about the perfume of the teachings. Some people talk about the atmosphere. So there is something, and then Ravi Ravindraji in the talk, I think the recent talk, he said, Krishnamurti is pointing to something, but we shouldn't focus on the finger. We have to look at what the big finger is pointing to, which cannot be described in words, which cannot be So the words are only there to point to this thing. And so, I think we are all aware to some extent that there is a quality of mind which we, let me put it like this, have experienced, which we have at least, maybe some people who knew have not, but I think most people who become interested in Krishnamurti's teachings have some sense of the quality of this quality of mind, and also recognize that this is the quality of mind that will see the truth without distortion. We'll see what is. We talk about that, of seeing what is, not what might be, what should be, what could be, ideas, this thing about enlightenment, this, that, and the other, but we see what is. And that is the quality that allows us to perceive what is. So, if I can quote Krishnamurti, when man becomes aware of the movement of his own thoughts, and this is a crucial thing, which is we haven't talked a lot about, because I think actually it's one of the more difficult things to actually see for oneself, not just verbally or intellectually, to see for oneself. So when man becomes aware of the movement of his own thoughts, he will see the division between the thinker and the thought, the observer and the observed, the experiencer and the experience. He will discover that this division is an illusion. Then only is there pure observation, which is insight without the shadow of the past or of time. This timeless insight brings about a deep, radical mutation in the mind. So this is this distinction, which even people who have some insight into the teachings and who are engaged in the inquiry and into self and self-knowledge that we are talking about, the actual perception is difficult, and not many people talk about it. So this is another of those very important points, this division, this recognition that the observer is the observed, the experiencer is the experience, that there is no difference between these. So about this, having said that there are people, many people, it's not an uncommon thing, have this kind of insight. At least they have some insight into the quality of mind that is capable of perceiving truth. And Krishnaji, people who are around Krishnaji, to them he would say, so it's worth saying here that when you have that insight, it doesn't necessarily stay. When that burglar breaks into your house and steals away the thoughts, he leaves, right? And then what you're left with is that he's maybe stolen some of your fear, or maybe he's stolen some desires. So this thief has gone. And you can't invite him in again. You don't know when he's going to come again. Right? So, but it does return, specifically if one is engaged in the inquiry. And the inquiry can only be into what is, not into what is that quality of mind, but into what is actually my quality of mind, right? And what is actually happening in my mind, in my relationships, in my feelings and thinking, so that if one is engaged in that, then it returns, right? And from time to time, and Krishnaji would say to the people who were around him, can you be rooted in this? Can you somehow find the way that you are rooted in that quality of mind, not rooted in our everyday, ordinary consciousness or quality of mind? Very difficult, even if you are observing in that manner, you would see that things occur. The children want attention. You have to go and do your jobs. The reality of your working life, maybe you're a physicist, you're doing research, you're solving some problem, and there you are. Thought has become the main way of functioning. Right? And then when you finish, you continue. The thoughts continue, and your mind is no longer free in the way that you had for a short while been. So I think if one persists with this, it's like you're back in the clouds and then out in the sunlight again. It's and you can't quite say how that is going to happen. So that is the challenge. And I think, as Krishna said, and somebody also made a comment in writing that appeared on the screen, we obviously get involved in day-to-day things and daily concerns because on some level we consider them as important, and of course they are. You have to look after the children, you have to somehow feed yourself, they are important. But so we do not give enough importance to the other, and partly because we are not convinced that the silent mind, the quiet mind has that much power, because this feels like nothing. It feels like just observation. But she is very clear, observation is action, but it feels like inaction. And we want to take action. So we start thinking what we can do, and it's very difficult to actually recognize, understand, perceive that quietude is has enormous energy, has enormous power to be able to act in our lives and bring about right action, if you like. It's difficult here to use words because these are deeper and more subtle things. So we are not that convinced. Even if we have encountered a mind that is relatively free, that mind has actually the power to completely transform our daily actions. So, but then, so I don't know, one can go into it a little bit more. I think another question is still this question of the individual. Krishnaji definitely said he did not think anybody had changed. He did not think that there would be another person like him for several centuries. But there was something else he said, which he may not have, I don't think he says in his talks. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it is not recorded. But to the people around him, he said it may not be possible for an individual to hold on to this consciousness, because that involved a lot of things, including, as people have said, even on this forum, the body, how healthy you are, because all these begin to distract you from being rooted in that. So it may not be possible for a single person to be that completely rooted in this quality of mind. It will come and go. But it is possible for a group of people to hold this, that between them somehow this quality exists and can be perceived by other people. Now, some people here I know have been to Brockwood and to other Krishnamurti places, but I spent most of my time at Brockwood, so I'm talking about Brockwood. It's not exclusive to Brockwood. And they remark about the atmosphere there. And Krishnaji himself threw the challenge to us, talking about the gate at Brockwood. Can the student coming for the first time to Brockwood be transformed the moment he enters the gate, the moment he crosses the cattle grid, which is a thing for keeping out cattle at the gate? So, and it was clear that he was talking about, can this place have an atmosphere that will be transformative? See, and he isn't now even talking about study and self-knowledge and investigation and inquiry. He is talking, he's saying, and clearly he's throwing this challenge because he feels that it's possible to have an atmosphere into which the moment somebody comes in, they will see the possibility, or they can see the possibility of that quality of mind that is free from all that, the content of consciousness. So this is a major challenge. And people have come to Brockwood and they talk about the atmosphere. Now this is created not because Brockwood has any fully, deeply transformed individuals there, but somehow it's possible between a group of people with their intention, and Brockwood we call it the intention to hold this, that people will have a sense of that quality. And in this, I can say this, what it consists of is there isn't so much conflict between people. And it's a moment-to-moment thing. If there are people who are free of anger and conflict, then in their daily interactions, there won't be that much of that around, even if sometimes they are. So it's noticeable. It's noticeable that they are between them somehow creating this atmosphere. So it's possible for us, though individually we may be not so strongly in this, fully transformed or completely free, or whatever we want to think about it, that between us we can create an atmosphere that becomes something that other people can experience, and like we have experienced with Krishnaji. So I think this the challenge to us, on one level, is individual. It is not just individual. It is about working together. It is about working with people. It is about our intention and our commitment and our passion about this thing. So at the end of this, I want to say we can't say very much about other people. So this question that we are asking should perhaps be changed. What we can talk about, where we can study the self, is in ourselves. And so the question really is, why don't I, because all of us in here are familiar with Krishnamurti, each of us can ask, why don't I, who have listened to Krishnamurti and read him and all of that, why don't I change? Why haven't I changed? And that is really the question for each of us. I think that's probably enough.
Thank you,
Dubey sir, may I request you to increase 10 minutes time so that the people can ask question as promised by you.
Okay. So we can take up questions. I think there are two interesting comments made by one by Mr. Dini and the other by Mr. Rama Rao. So Mr. Dini, would you like to ask if you are around? Mr. Dini? Mr. Rama Rao, please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question. Unmute yourself, sir. Unmute.
Sir, my question is that you mentioned, Professor Krishna, sir, you mentioned freedom is in beginning. And in other place, you mentioned that I study physics after I became a Einstein. So how these two sentences, I could not able to get it. Kindly throw some light.
Sir, if you are not free from the egoistic approach, then whatever you are looking at, you yourself will distort. And therefore, you don't perceive the truth and you are blocking yourself. But the ego is not like an organ in our body all the time there, which has to be operated. It comes into being in the manner in which I am approaching the issue. If I am approaching it from the point of view of ending some disturbance or seeking some pleasure for myself or satisfaction, then it becomes egoistic. But if I am just looking at it with curiosity and wanting to understand what is happening, in that there is no ego. In physics also, I mean, if you can do your physics because you want to publish a paper and you want to be the first person and want to be famous and so on in that field, or you can be doing it because you really want to understand what is taking place in nature. In the latter case, it is an inquiry that is free from the ego. But it's limited because you ask only limited questions about how nature is functioning in that area. So the approach matters enormously, and that's why freedom has to be at the beginning. If through an ego process you cannot come to freedom from the ego, that's obvious. Through violence you cannot come to peace, and so on. So it is one of those things that the means are the end, and therefore the freedom has to be at the beginning. Otherwise, learning does not even begin.
Do we have any other question? Anybody else? We don't have any questions, Sushil, so we can as well close now. Sushil.
Savitaji wants to ask question.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Professor Krishna, Dr. Rao, and Arshi. Thanks a lot for being here today. And
Thank you very
next
much. Thank you,
Sunday we
everyone.
meet again, and Mr. Siddharth Menon is going to talk to us. It will be on poems, his own and also Krishnaji's poems. So we look forward to his lecture next week. With these words, I thank you all once again. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.